Hi friends, and welcome back or welcome to my channel. If you're brand new, my name is Sarah. I'm an elementary music educator, and on this channel we talk about all things music ed, especially ways to make your classroom more meaningful and joyful for you and your students. Today's video is all about mistakes. We all make mistakes, right? I mean, it's kind of expected, but we learn from them, right? For example, I was in grad school like 10 years ago, and I was living on campus for the first semester, which, was a mistake in itself, but that's not the mistake I'm going to be telling you about. I was walking around campus a lot. The grad dorm was way up on the hill, and I was walking down into the, main campus a lot. I needed more comfortable shoes, and slipper shoes were very in. So I decided I was going to buy a pair of slipper shoes. Like, they would be comfortable, but they would be like have a hard enough sole that I could get to where I needed to go, and it would be great. So I got a pair of these slipper shoes, and then I wore them on a very rainy day and completely ruined them. Like, I was walking around campus with soaking wet feet, ruined shoes, thinking like, I feel like such a goon right now. Turns out I had bought actual slippers. So I was walking around campus in slippers for hours in the rain with wet shoes, walking into these buildings, leaving like puddles behind me. It was so embarrassing. But I learned from that mistake, right? I am not ever going to wear slippers out in public, walking around again. Probably. I don't know. I'm pregnant, so we'll see if that actually holds up. But in all seriousness, today's video is about 3 mistakes that I made when I first started teaching. And it's natural and expected to make mistakes when you are first starting out. My background, so I don't have a music education degree. I have 2 music degrees, and I went back and got certified in music ed after I already had my master's. I did student teach, but it was only for 5 weeks because it was an accelerated program. There's a lot I didn't learn and had to learn at my first job. I think there's a common sentiment among music ed majors that even if you did student teach for an extended period of time, there's still a bunch of things you don't know until you actually get into the classroom and do it yourself. That is, of course, what happened to me. Having a limited experience in a public classroom, I had been teaching on and off in different situations for many years before that. But there are lots of things I just didn't know, and I had to learn on the job, and I'm sure that a lot of you feel the same way. But learning from your mistakes requires self-reflection, and I have a whole video on self-reflection that I'm going to link in the description box below for you to go and check out. It's all about self-reflecting on your teaching practices. So if you haven't seen that, watch this video and then go watch the next one. Without further ado, here we go. 3 mistakes I made as a beginning teacher. So this is my first probably 2 or 3 years of teaching. In my first job, I was not just a classroom music teacher, but also a band director, and I loved it. I loved Miss Band. I love where I am now, but I do miss band. I'm a band geek at heart. But I used to be a band director, and like so many other band directors before me, I assigned practice logs. That's what you do, right? You assign a practice log. You assign 20 minutes a week or 30 minutes a week. I taught 5th grade through 8th grade band. So I was assigning practice logs because that's what you did, right? We have reading logs, we do practice logs with the idea that the more you do the thing, the better you're going to get at it. I probably don't need to tell a lot of you that that was very tedious for me, checking them off every week, making sure there was a signature, making sure they had the right amount of time logged, making sure that if they didn't have it this week, they had it next week, or they were all caught up by a certain date. It was tedious for me. I'm sure it was tedious for my students too. And that's not to say that I don't believe in the power of consistent practice. I do, but practice logs in my school's situation, in my student situations, was not the way to go. I didn't learn that until a few years into the job. And by then I had already deterred a lot of kids from band. And I feel really awful about that, or I felt really awful about that. I thought I was doing the right thing. It just didn't end up working. Practice became a chore, it wasn't fun, and I was really not very specific with my practice instructions. I think by my 3rd or so year in that position, I had gotten rid of them, which was a really good thing for me and for my students. Something I didn't consider until a few years into the job was that practice logs also kind of were an equity issue. Depending on the student's family situation, on their housing situation, on whether or not they had additional responsibilities at home that I might not have considered. All those different things can affect whether or not a kid has time to practice, has the environment to practice in. There were just so many things that were happening in a lot of my students' lives that I was completely unaware of for the first 2 years that affected their ability to practice. So maybe it wasn't even an issue of, I just didn't. It was, hey, I wish I could, but I can't. So I got rid of them. And the results of that were, okay, maybe we learned stuff a little bit slower. There was a little bit of reteaching I had to do. But my retention rate went way up. Without these practice logs, we were able to prioritize learning a band instrument as an enjoyable, wonderful experience that didn't have that added pressure of making sure that, oh, did you get your time requirement in? And if you do practice logs and they work for your school and for your students, that's great. But in my experience, that just didn't work. Beginning teacher mistake number 2 that I made was losing my cool. And you might be thinking, everybody does that, not just as a beginning teacher, but people lose their cool all the time. And yeah, I mean, I remember in elementary school, my teachers yelled when they wanted to be taken seriously, when we were doing things that were rude or breaking rules or unsafe. Like, I understand the instinct to raise your voice. I get that. And I am a more soft-spoken person, so I do raise my voice to be heard, but I'm talking more about, I lost my cool and I kind of spiraled a little out of control and ultimately made my students feel, I think, ashamed and bad about themselves. And that's not ever what I want to do. In those moments, I was unable to control my own emotions. I think that happens to a lot of people, not just teachers, not just adults. That happens to a lot of people. Now, in the moment or shortly afterwards, or maybe the next day, I was able to try to fix it by apologizing. We need to normalize apologizing to students. We need to authentically model apologies. Teachers are in a prime position to do this. Authentically modeling apologizing is so much more effective than trying to simulate it in a dialogue or in a like a role-playing situation where it can feel sort of forced and disingenuous. I had the opportunity to apologize authentically. I am so much better now at expressing my emotions in a healthy way to my students. And the way I do that is by modeling taking deep breaths, narrating my feelings, describing what my body might be feeling, and then reacting in a healthy way. My school right now that I'm at is a school that follows Ruler. And we have a mood meter chart on in all of our classrooms. And we recognize, the adults recognize, and we teach students that no feeling is bad. Feelings are feelings. We feel a whole range of emotions. But what matters most is how we can identify them and express them in a healthy way. And that is what's most important. Do I still get frustrated? Yes. Do I still get disappointed? Yes, I use those words a lot with my students, but I use them in a healthy way and I model them in a healthy way. That has taken a lot of practice, but it's so worth it. And finally, new teacher mistake number 3 that I made. Now this one is more about self-advocacy, which admittedly is a skill I'm still working on, but I am better at than I was 8 years ago. Mistake number 3 that I made was allowing my students to leave my classroom, my ensemble, my lessons pretty frequently at the request of other teachers, whether it was for things like test makeups or helping with the yearbook or arranging flowers for graduation. Yeah. Can you sense what I'm feeling right now? I just let students leave too often. So a student would come into my classroom and say, so-and-so needs my help to do this, or I need to go make up a test. And the first time it happened, I thought, hey, of course, sure, you can go ahead, make up that test. I wanted to be a flexible teacher. I mean, things happen and tests need to be made up, and go ahead, yeah. What's one absence? The problem was, it wasn't just one absence. It started to become a pattern. And I don't just mean with one particular student, I mean overall. My saying, yes, you can leave my class, established a pattern of leniency that my colleagues began to rely on, to my students' detriment. Time out of my classroom was instructional time lost. All instructional time needs to be protected. And I realize there are going to have to be some exceptions to that. But I helped establish this pattern of leniency. And that sent a message to other teachers. Looking back, I see now that that also reflected on me and how I felt about my own instructional time. It wasn't important. And that's not a message I wanted to convey. It was very hard for me to say no for the first time. It was hard. It was hard to say no the first time. It was hard to have conversations with my colleagues about why I needed them in my room, but I did it. And after a while, it became a little more difficult for my students to get out of my class to go do something else. And one example of this form of self-advocacy, which is, yes, partly me advocating for myself and my instructional time, but more so for my students' instructional time. I was running a band rehearsal at the end of the day. I think that was the normal band time, my middle school band, and it was toward the end of the year. So a student came down who wasn't in band and said, hey, I need to pull so-and-so. So all the students in a particular grade, I think, I need to pull these kids for superlative photos for the yearbook. And I said, okay, we're in the middle of a band rehearsal, so I can't allow that to happen right now. And the student tried to push me on that because I don't think the student wanted to disappoint the teacher who had sent the student down. So the student asked again, and I said, it can't happen right now. I'm in the middle of class with these students. And I forget exactly what happened in the in-between. Maybe the student left and came back, or maybe someone called me down. I don't remember what happened in the in-between, but I didn't let those students leave my room. Eventually, the teacher who sent that student down to me came to see me. And as soon as that teacher showed up outside my door, this happened because I don't like confrontation. Even though I knew that in that situation I was right, I don't like confrontation. But I knew that this conversation had to happen. What was I gonna do? Like, hide in my room? No. So band rehearsal was over. I talked with the teacher. And this teacher said something that blew me away. She said, I respect you more for saying no. I respect you more for that. I was shocked. I was flabbergasted. I had known this teacher for a few years. I didn't expect those words to come out of her mouth. And wow, now that is an exception. That really has not happened to me ever again. That meant a lot to me. And I wish more people had that mindset. Yes, it's important to be flexible, but we have to have boundaries. Learning from your mistakes is not always easy. Actually, is it ever easy? I mean, I guess like if you get zapped by an electric fence or touch a hot stove, like, yeah, okay, fine. But things that happen in the classroom, mistakes that kind of roll out of things that you thought you were supposed to do, like practice logs or, losing your cool, which is something that, come on, we're all gonna do again at some point, no matter how grounded we think we can be. It's hard to learn from your mistakes, but I like to think that these three are emblematic of ways that I have grown in the past almost 10 years as a public school music teacher. I'm going to ask a vulnerable question right now. What mistakes have you made? What kind of mistakes did you make at the beginning of your career? What are you concerned about now? I am not going to judge you because I'm not perfect and no one's ever going to be perfect. So if you are comfortable, drop your mistakes in the comments and no judgment. Let's see what kind of mistakes we've made and what kind of self-reflection that we've done or can do to turn them around and make them into better experiences for you and for your students. If you're not comfortable leaving your mistakes in the comments, you can always reach out to me on Instagram at A Different Musician. You can email me. I am more than happy to have conversations or just, exchange stories about these kinds of things that I'm sure we all have gone through and maybe are going through right now. If what I said today resonated with you, then you are invited to find me and connect with me on Instagram. You can like and subscribe to my channel. That helps other people like you find and learn from my content. And if you are interested, you can also subscribe to my email list. I send weekly, sometimes twice a week emails to the ADM or A Different Musician community, where I share teacher toolbox resources, tips, tricks, advice, all kinds of things to help bring more meaning and joy into your elementary music classroom. I will drop a link to that self-reflection YouTube video below, as well as links to my blog, my Teachers Pay Teachers store, anywhere where you can find me online. All those things will be below in the description box. Feel free to reach out to me on social media with any questions, comments, or concerns, and happy music making.